My girlfriend broke up with me because I had no ambition. 3 years later, she interviewed for a job at my company. There's a very specific kind of quiet that happens in a conference room when someone realizes, in real time, exactly who's sitting across the table from them. I got to watch that happen to another human being once, and I have to tell you, it did more for my self-esteem than 3 years of therapy combined. My name's Brandon. I was 26 when Nicole broke up with me, standing in the kitchen of the apartment we'd shared for 2 years, holding a mug of coffee like it was a shield. I remember the mug specifically because it had a chip on the handle I'd been meaning to fix for months, and some absurd part of my brain fixated on that chip while she told me calmly, almost gently, like she was doing me a favor, that she didn't see a future with someone who had no real ambition. Understand why that sentence landed the way it did. You have to understand where I was in life at that point. I'd graduated with a degree in mechanical engineering, decent school, decent grades, but instead of chasing a corporate ladder job right out of college, I'd taken a position at a small manufacturing startup, the kind of company with 12 employees and a founder who worked out of what used to be his garage. The pay wasn't great. The title wasn't impressive. I remember Nicole's father asking me at a family dinner what exactly it was I did there, and me fumbling through an explanation about supply chain logistics and prototype testing that clearly didn't land the way I wanted it to. Nicole worked in marketing at a much bigger, much shinier company downtown, the kind with a rooftop patio and a logo people actually recognized. Her friends worked at places with names that made people go, "Oh, impressive," at parties. I think looking back now with the benefit of distance that she wasn't entirely wrong to want more security than I could offer her at that specific moment in my life. What she was wrong about was assuming that where I was at 26 was where I intended to stay. "You're comfortable," she told me that day in the kitchen, and I remember the word comfortable landing like an insult, though I don't think that's entirely how she meant it. "I need someone who wants more, who's building something." I don't think you even want that, Brandon, and I can't spend the next 10 years waiting to find out. I didn't fight for that relationship for what it's worth. I want to be honest about that part, because it matters for how the rest of this story lands. I didn't beg, didn't promise to change, didn't sit there and list off my 5-year plan to prove her wrong. I was hurt genuinely, badly, in the way you only get hurt in your mid-20s when you still think love is supposed to work a certain way if you just do it right. But some small, stubborn part of me also thought quietly to myself, standing in that kitchen, "You don't actually know what I want. You just know what I have right now." We split the apartment's contents over an awkward weekend 2 weeks later. He kept the coffee table. I kept the dog, a scruffy terrier mix named Waffles who'd technically been my rescue before we even started dating, which had been a point of low-grade tension between us for 2 years that I don't think either of us ever fully resolved. I moved into a smaller place across town. She moved in with a friend, and within about 4 months, according to the mutual friends who still updated me on things I didn't ask about, she was dating someone who worked in finance, someone whose job title, I was told more than once with a certain pointed emphasis, actually meant something. I'm not going to pretend the next year wasn't rough. It was. I threw myself into work, partly out of genuine ambition and partly, if I'm honest, out of spite, which I've since learned is a genuinely underrated early career motivator even if it's not something they teach you in business school. The little manufacturing startup I worked for, the one Nicole's father hadn't been able to make sense of at dinner, started growing. Fast. We landed a contract with a much larger industrial client 18 months after Nicole and I broke up. And the founder, a guy named Justin who'd built the place out of nothing but stubbornness and a mechanical engineering degree of his own, started pulling me into bigger and bigger projects. I went from supply chain logistics and prototype testing to running an entire product development team within 2 years. My salary nearly tripled. More than that, though, I actually loved what I was doing, which was a thing I hadn't fully appreciated I'd been missing until I had it. I remember the exact moment things started to turn, actually, about 8 months after the breakup. Justin called me into his cramped little office, the one that still smelled faintly of the garage it used to be, and told me he wanted me running point on a new prototype line we'd been pitching to a regional distributor. It was the first time anyone had handed me real ownership over something instead of just a piece of a larger project. And I remember driving home that night calling my mom from the car, practically giddy, the kind of unfiltered excitement I hadn't let myself feel about work in longer than I wanted to admit. There's a strange, quiet irony in the fact that the version of ambition Nicole had accused me of lacking was already sitting right there in front of me, in a converted garage with bad lighting and a founder who believed in me more than I believed in myself at that point. I just hadn't had the right person yet to hand me the keys to it. The distributor deal went well. Then another one did. Somewhere in there, without any single dramatic turning point I could point to, I stopped being the guy explaining an unimpressive-sounding job to a girlfriend's skeptical father, and started being the guy other companies were trying to poach with recruiter emails I mostly ignored, because by then, I genuinely liked where I was building something. By the time 3 years had passed since that conversation in the kitchen, I wasn't the same guy Nicole had described as having no ambition. I don't say that to brag, or at least I hope I don't. I say it because it's important context for what happened next. I've been promoted to Director of Product Development. The company, which Nicole's father wouldn't have recognized the name of 3 years earlier, had grown from 12 employees to almost 200 and had just closed a Series B funding round that put us on a few companies to watch lists in our industry. It moved out of the converted garage years earlier, obviously, into an actual office building with an actual lobby and an actual HR department, which is where this story really starts. I was sitting in my office on a Wednesday afternoon in March, reviewing resumes for an open marketing coordinator position on my team, when one of them stopped me cold. Nicole. Same last name, same graduation year on her resume, same university. I actually laughed out loud, alone in my office, a short, disbelieving bark of a laugh, because the universe apparently has a sense of humor specific enough to be almost cruel. I sat with it for a minute before deciding what to do. My first instinct, honestly, was to just quietly pull her resume from the pile and move on, avoid the whole thing entirely. It felt petty either way, whether I advanced her or buried her, and I didn't love either version of myself in that scenario. But our hiring process wasn't just me. Resumes for that role went through an initial HR screen with our head of people operations, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Megan, before ever reaching my desk, which meant Nicole had already cleared that first filter on her own merits before I'd even seen her name. Pulling her now, for reasons that had nothing to do with her actual qualifications, felt like exactly the kind of small, ugly move I didn't want to be capable of. I left her in the pipeline and let the process run the way it was supposed to. I didn't tell anyone. Not my team, not Justin, not even Waffles, who at that point was getting old and mostly just wanted his dinner on time regardless of my personal drama. I figured there was a real chance she'd wash out at the HR phone screen stage anyway, that this whole strange coincidence would resolve itself before it ever became my problem to navigate. It didn't. Her phone screen with Megan went well enough that she got advanced to the panel interview round, the round I happened to be sitting on, because as Director of Product Development, marketing coordinators on our team worked closely enough with product that I was a standard part of that particular hiring loop. I could have recused myself. I thought about it seriously for about 2 full days. I even drafted an email to Megan explaining I had a personal conflict of interest with one of the marketing coordinator candidates and would prefer to step back from that specific panel. I had it written and ready to send. I didn't send it. And I want to be honest about why, because it wasn't entirely noble. Part of me, a part I'm not particularly proud of but also can't pretend didn't exist, wanted to be in that room, wanted to see her face. Wanted, on some level I hadn't fully examined, closure of a kind that had nothing to do with professionalism and everything to do with 3 years of quietly proving a version of myself right that she'd told me didn't exist. I told Jason about it over beers that week, the only person I let in on the whole absurd situation, mostly because I needed someone to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. Jason, ever the blunt one, just laughed for a solid 30 seconds before saying, "Man, you couldn't write this if you tried. You have to sit on that panel. You'd regret it forever if you didn't." He was probably right, though it took me those 2 full days of drafting and deleting that recusal email to arrive at the same conclusion on my own. The interview was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after her resume first crossed my desk. I'd love to tell you I walked into that conference room feeling nothing but calm, professional neutrality, but that would be a lie. My hands were actually a little unsteady as I set my laptop and notepad down at the head of the table, which is an absurd thing to admit about a job interview for a coordinator-level role, but there it is. Megan came in first, ran through the standard opening, our culture, the role, the format of the panel. Then she opened the door for the candidate. I want you to understand, I had genuinely braced myself for this moment for 2 full weeks. I thought I'd prepared for every version of how it might feel. I hadn't prepared enough. Nicole walked in wearing a blazer I recognized, the navy one she used to wear to her old marketing job, the one with the rooftop patio, a detail so small and specific it almost undid my composure faster than her face did. She had a folder of printed materials tucked under one arm, a portfolio, the kind of polished, over-prepared packet you put together when you desperately want a job. She was scanning the room the way candidates do, quick, nervous, cataloging faces, and I watched in real time the exact half-second her eyes landed on mine and everything about her posture changed. Her mouth actually opened slightly before she caught herself. Megan, to her credit, didn't notice anything unusual, just gestured Nicole toward the empty chair across from us and kept moving through her opening script. Nicole sat down. Her hands, I noticed, were shaking slightly as she set her portfolio on the table, which was a strange thing to watch, because I don't think I'd ever once seen Nicole nervous in the 2 years we'd dated. It'd always been the composed one, the one with the plan, the one who knew exactly what she wanted and exactly what she thought other people should want too. "Nicole, this is Brandon, our Director of Product Development," Megan said, entirely unaware she was introducing 2 people with 3 years of unfinished history between them. "He'll be one of your panelists today, since the coordinator role works closely with the product team." "You've actually met before," Nicole said, and I have to give her credit, her voice only wavered slightly. "A while ago." We have, I agreed, and left it exactly there, professional, brief, giving her nothing more to work with, which I think unsettled her more than almost anything else I could have said. I'm not going to pretend the interview that followed was some triumphant movie-style moment where I got to list off my accomplishments while she sat there squirming. Wasn't like that, mostly because it didn't need to be. My name was already on the door of that conference room, functionally speaking. My title was already printed on the agenda she'd been emailed the day before, which I later found out from Megan she'd apparently stared at for a solid minute before the interview, hoping it was a different Brandon, some other guy with the same first name at the same company, a hope that had evaporated the second I walked in. I asked her the standard questions. Tell me about a time you managed competing priorities. Walk me through how you'd approach a product launch campaign with a compressed timeline. She answered them competently, actually, genuinely competently, which surprised me a little, because some small, uncharitable part of me had almost wanted her to fall apart completely. She didn't. She was good at her job, or at least good at talking about being good at her job, and I found myself, against my own expectations, being fair to her, because that's what the process required, and because some part of me wanted to prove, even just to myself, that I could be better than the version of pettiness this whole scenario was practically begging me to indulge in. But there was a moment near the end of the interview that I'll admit I did allow myself. Megan asked Nicole the standard closing question, why she was interested in leaving her current role for this one. Nicole talked about wanting to work somewhere with real momentum, somewhere actually building something meaningful, somewhere with ambition. And she used that word ambition without a flicker of recognition for how loaded it was in that particular room, with that particular audience of one. What draws you to this company specifically? Megan followed up, as opposed to somewhere more established. Nicole talked for almost 2 full minutes about how impressed she was by our growth trajectory, our Series B, our reputation as one of the most exciting companies in the space right now. A phrase she'd clearly lifted from one of the companies to watch, articles I mentioned earlier, articles that existed specifically because of years of work from a team I now led. Work that had started right around the time she'd told me I had no ambition and walked out of our kitchen. I didn't say anything pointed. I didn't need to. I just asked one more question, calm, professional, giving nothing away except to the one person in the room who understood exactly what it meant. What would you say to someone, I asked, who assumed a company like this one wasn't going anywhere? She looked at me for a beat too long before answering, something flickering behind her eyes that told me she understood precisely what I was asking underneath the professional phrasing. I'd say they were wrong, she said finally, quietly. Obviously. Obviously, I agreed and moved on to closing remarks. Here's the part of this story that I think matters more than the interview itself, though. After she left the room, Megan and I sat down to compare notes as we always did after panel interviews, and I made a decision in that moment that I still feel good about today. Nicole had genuinely interviewed well. Her experience was solid. Her answers were sharp. If I'd let personal history dictate my feedback, I could have quietly torpedoed her candidacy with vague, deniable concerns. Not quite the right culture fit, the kind of soft-kill phrase that ends careers without ever having to explain yourself. I didn't do that. I gave Megan honest, professional feedback. Strong candidate, solid marketing instincts, would recommend advancing to final round. After she left the room that day, Megan actually turned to me and said, half joking, "You two really have met before, huh?" Clearly sensing there was more history there than either of us had let on, but tactful enough not to push it. I gave her the short version, the ex-girlfriend/candidate coincidence, without any of the specifics about what she'd actually said to me in that kitchen 3 years earlier. Megan just raised her eyebrows and said, "Well, your feedback better be based purely on the interview then?" Half teasing, half serious, and I told her honestly that it would be, and I meant it. She didn't get the job in the end, though not because of anything I did. The final round came down to her and another candidate with more specific experience in our particular product category, and Justin, who made the final call on that role, chose the other person based purely on relevant experience. I never told him about Nicole and me. There was no reason to, and honestly, by that point, I didn't need him to know. I'd already gotten whatever it was I needed out of the situation, and it turned out it had very little to do with whether she got the job at all. What I needed, it turned out, was just that one moment in the doorway, watching her face change when she realized exactly whose company she was so impressed by, exactly whose real momentum she'd been describing back to him without realizing it. I didn't need her to fail. I just needed her to see clearly, undeniably, in a room she couldn't argue her way out of, that the guy with no ambition had built the very thing she was now trying to talk her way into. I ran into her one more time, about 2 months later, at a coffee shop near the office, purely by chance. It was brief, a little awkward, both of us doing that overly polite small talk two people do when they're both pretending a shared history doesn't exist. She asked how things were going, and I told her honestly that things were good, really good, and I meant it in a way that had nothing to do with proving anything to her anymore. That was the strangest part, honestly, realizing somewhere in that conversation that I genuinely didn't need her to be impressed. I just was, on my own terms, for my own reasons, which was a much better feeling than the one I'd walked out of that kitchen with 3 years earlier. She wished me well before she left, and I think she meant it in whatever complicated way a person can mean that towards someone whose success accidentally became a mirror they hadn't asked to look into. I wished her well, too. I did mean that, too, actually. It's a strange thing, growing past someone. You'd think it would feel like victory, and for one specific moment in one specific conference room, maybe it did a little. But mostly, in the end, it just felt like relief. Finally getting to close a door that had been left open a crack for 3 years, not with a slam, but with the quiet, ordinary click of someone who simply didn't need it open anymore. Waffles is 13 now, mostly deaf, still demanding dinner exactly on schedule. Nicole, as far as I know, is still at her marketing job downtown, the one with the rooftop patio. And me, I still think about that word sometimes, ambition, but it doesn't sting anymore. It just makes me a little grateful, honestly, that someone once looked at exactly who I was and decided it wasn't enough. Because it turned out that was the exact push I needed to prove, mostly to myself, that it was.